as all of you know, is a tuba player, and he currently, he says was a tuba player, and he currently works at the Lamont School of Music at the University of Denver and the Aspen Music Festival. And he was a former principal tuba of New York Phil and also the Houston Symphony. He's taught at many schools, including Rice University, and also done several recordings with the Canadian Brass, and he can probably tell me a lot more than that. So Warren, thank you for joining me today to do this live talk. It's really important, very special to me, so thank you so much.
Nice to be here.
All right. So before we start, I just want to go ahead and do a quick shout out to Tiago, who is a trombone player in Portugal. He's just been sharing all this information and helping, share the videos and everything. He's really excited about the live stream today. Also, I have a quick hello for you, Warren, from Richard Watson. He said that he went to school with you.
He did indeed. Yeah, we had many fun times together.
Yeah, I'm hoping that he can join in today. I think he said he wasn't sure if he could make it, but
okay.
He definitely want me to say hello to you. And he wants to do one of these as well, because I guess he's had this issue as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, so Warren, can you just start off by telling us a little bit about what really got you into tuba playing? Like, what was your musical upbringing?
I grew up in a family of non-musicians. My father listened to music a lot. And he had recordings of the Dukes of Dixieland, and I was always drawn to the tuba player and the bass line, a bottom feeder from a very young age. And in fourth grade, I grew up in Denver, and in fourth grade, I went to Denver Public Schools, and I started on trumpet, and 3 months later, I asked for a tuba, and the music teacher got me one, and I played it, and I played it for a while and said, okay, now give me the trumpet back. And she said, no, you should really stick to this. This fits you, and you should really hang in there with this instrument. And she said, and besides, trumpet players are a dime a dozen, and colleges are looking for good tuba players more than, and you're more likely to get a scholarship. So I grew up like very middle class, or maybe on the lower end of the middle class. I was comfortable, but we weren't rich. I didn't grow up skiing, so I just stuck with it. And
you did come from Vail.
Correct. I did not. Vail was not a thing then. I'm that old. So I just stuck with it. When I was, I guess, 11 or 12, we moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Michigan had a really good music program statewide. It was just. It just seemed to be a big thing in the public schools there, and then not only that, growing up in the shadow of the University of Michigan where it was there, I had really good access and exposure to to a lot of musical things. And I eventually went to Interlochen as a kid, for a couple of summers. And I ran into a guy in 7th grade. He was 2 years older than me. I ran into a guy in 7th grade who had been to the Interlochen Arts Academy the year before. And, but he was back in public schools that year. And this guy was doing stuff on the tuba I just never even dreamed. And, this guy truly inspired me. My parents never had to ask me to practice after that again. I heard this guy play, and I thought, oh man, I got to be able to do that. So, I think that, that guy was the real turning point that, that got me going. His name is Ed Kalustian. I vaguely stayed in contact with him or heard things about him. I haven't heard in many years how he's doing. So Ed, if you're out there, thanks, man. You were a really great person in my life at that time. So.
Oh, yeah. That's really awesome.
And then
So when you started tuba and learning tuba, did you feel like you had a really good foundation as far as the building blocks for playing, or were you kind of more of a natural player, like just kind of went
no,
along and didn't really have to work so much on technical stuff?
when I was in 7th grade, I started taking private lessons from a guy who was in Ann Arbor, and he had studied with Bill Bell. So, I think at a pretty young age, this guy was giving me some pretty solid information about, how to produce sound and and things to do. I want to say in a lot of ways, he probably set the mold for a lot of room to grow on. There was a foundation of how to do things that allowed growth.
Okay, really good. And then when you started to improve and everything, you obviously went into studying tuba in college, correct?
Yes.
And then after that, you started doing auditions. In that time period of when you started to do auditions, especially like when you started in the Houston Symphony, like what was kind of can you kind of explain, like, how do I say this? Like, what were you kind of working on then? Like as far as like playing wise, when you're preparing for auditions, any information like that?
That's a really good question. And I don't know that I was cognizant of this at the time, but I was always working on, like short-term goals and then long-term goals. And I realized that long-term goals would just be on a continuum. And, while maybe the next month I would be further down the road to that long-term goal, I always realized that I'm not there yet, but I'm better than I was. And so just keep working, toward that long-term goal. And that had to do with, like really fine points of stuff, like, just the grace of moving from one note to another, whether the interval is small or as the interval gets bigger for a brass player, it's a larger leap. And just working on the grace of getting there and finding efficient movement where I did physically as little as possible to get there, but just enough to get there. So, and those kinds of things. Smoothing out slurs, taking fine points of articulation and try and make them more and more pristine, the whole time. And and so they're really fine at some point. And what I always tell students is that if you're here and you want to get over here, the problem is you put on blinders, while you're here. And and I always stand up next to a wall and do this, and I look at this problem on the wall and I see this much, and what happens over time is I get better. And so I am moving down this trail, but from here the wall looks the same. So it kind of looks like you're not making progress, and you really have to step back and get a larger perspective and think, oh, I started the wall over here and now I'm here. Okay, it's not here, but it is here. So okay, I'll go back to this and and keep doing that work. And it's just little fine points. And at the end of the journey or halfway through the journey, you realize it's really quite a distance to get from here to here. And you really are a much better player here than you are here, even though you still want to get here. And, and by the way, there is no here. It's somewhere out there. It's, you'll chase your tail your whole life looking for that, and that's part of the beauty of what we do, or what I did, was that, you are never going to get there. You're always going to be chasing something that's hopefully greater.
Yeah, it takes a lot of motor skills and years of practice and refining things. And I just have to say that you have one of the cleanest, like, I think, how do I say this, like fronts of notes, like entrances on notes that I've ever heard. Like seriously, among all wrestlers, it's just one of the
Very
cleanest,
kind of you
most
to
like,
say.
it just comes out of nowhere and it's like, it's just there. It's
I
just one
thought
of
a lot
those,
about it, you know,
like,
and it was a long, slow journey on this, you know, to get there.
yeah, it is amazing. I mean, you have one of the like best sounds. I mean, it's just really it's a huge sound, but it's not rough around the edges. It's just very, it's perfect.
Spent a lot of time thinking about it, you know, and you know, a lot of that happened, you know, after I was in the Philharmonic. You know, I want to say that whole process accelerated once I got in the Philharmonic for a lot of reasons. One, it was a terrible acoustic space, especially for low frequencies. It was just a horrible space. And the other thing is, you know, the folks that I played with, they all made really amazing sounds and quite enormous. So, you know, you just start to work, you know, trying to catch up,
Yeah.
you know, and be a good colleague, you know.
Yeah. And when you were in the Philharmonic, I think you started to, around then, that's when you started to experience embouchure dystonia symptoms. What was, how far along was that?
Oh, I was in the orchestra 14, 15 years before any of that came along.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Wow. So when you started to experience your embouchure dystonia symptoms, what were kind of the first signs, like when you look back and see things?
The first sign was I lost my soft response. You know, I was always very comfortable starting a note softly. It, you know, it just wasn't, you know, yes, I worked on it. You know, you know, and I learned how to do it. It wasn't always that I could do that, but you know, you know, by the time I was in Houston, in the Houston Symphony, I was really very comfortable starting a note softly. It just wasn't an issue. And then all of a sudden this came up, you know, and it hadn't been an issue for like 15, 16 years. And you know, I thought, what the heck is this? You know, why am I getting why am I getting that? You know, where it was always you know, I just never had an issue with that before. And then, you know, it was sort of in a certain register. And then, you know, I started noticing that articulating notes at any dynamic became a problem. It was you know, once I got playing the note, I could find it, but starting it there, you know, became like, what's going on, you know? And so I started putting 8 hours a day practicing it, you know, just you know, go back to like, you know, I used to do in college, and you know, it didn't help. It was interesting. A few years ago during the Aspen Music Festival in the summertime, I ran into Leon Fleischer, you know, the pianist who's we all know, you know, he's got it like here. You know, and he was standing outside the tent. I went up and said hello, and you know, I told him I remembered his performance of Ravel left-hand piano concerto with the Philharmonic, and you know, that was, you know, that was memorable, and you know, I enjoyed his performance. And you know, I said, you know, I'm a dystonia guy too. I said, you know, it cost me my career. And you know, and his eyes just rolled, and he said, ah. And the first question he says, and when it came on, what did you do? I said, I just practiced like crazy. He said, exactly. That's what we all do. And he said, didn't help, did it? I said, nope.
Yeah, I felt the same way too. You know, it's interesting because we were talking before we started this live stream about our symptoms, and I also had the same thing too, where I had always been a really good, very quiet player. Very, like, if I had to do any high entrances very quietly, or any register actually, I could just do it effortlessly. And it wasn't something where I had to use a lot of tension. I didn't have to, you know, put any more effort, physical effort into it to do it. And then all of a sudden I couldn't do day crescendos. At one point I could do crescendos, but as soon as I got to the top, I started day crescendoing. I couldn't, my embouchure would just collapse. And especially in the middle register, I would start to try to go for quiet entrances, and I just couldn't even hit my middle C, which is like basically our
Oh
C or
no.
F is like our fundamental pitch. So it was just very frustrating. Like, I felt like how is this possible that I can't do the most basic thing on my instrument?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I felt like, you know, are you going crazy? You know, I mean, it's, you know, what's wrong? Just do what you've always done, you know, and hadn't had to think about. And then all of a sudden you have to think about it. And then maybe it comes the way you want to, you know. And, you know, I had tremendous support from my colleagues all through this. You know, I mean, I couldn't
Oh,
have
that's
worked with
good.
a greater group of people through this, because these guys were saying, no, man, you straighten it out. We're with you. And I'm so grateful, you know, for that to this day. And I'm really sorry I wasn't able to straighten it out. But you know, you're sitting there and you're doing this, and your body does something else. And one of the things that they would say along the line is, just don't think, just play. And I thought, you know, and well-meaning, you know, and I thought, okay, but the problem is when you don't think, something crazy comes out, and you think, what's the matter? I mean, you know, an analogy I give to people a lot is, if I'm gonna try and use my you know, my picture on my Zoom thing. So I'm gonna try it, and I can see the, you know, the top corner of this little fireplace thing here, you know, the mantle, the top corner right there. So I can see that, and I can describe it, and I can point to it exactly, or you know, I know what it feels like, you know, in my face. And then, you know, I ask my body to point to that thing, and my body goes, and you think, wait, no, that's not where it is. It's, you know, it's up there, and, you know, and the body goes here, time it. And that's what happens when you don't think. So, you know, that didn't work. And so I was never able to play without thinking again. I was never able to play again from a purely musical thought standpoint, and just let it rip. You know,
Yeah, it's
and it
hard
got
to,
worse and worse and worse, and nah.
yeah, it's hard to explain to people that with dystonia, especially musicians who don't have it, the one thing that they kind of overlook or they don't know is that with dystonia it comes with a what is it called, proprioception? I can't say that. It's basically your perception of your body, awareness of your body in space. So we have kind of this. It's very much like a sensory disorder. So it's like if you try to feel something, and imagine if you can't feel it, like if your leg fell asleep and you went to stand up and use it, and instead of feeling your leg, you would kind of feel this kind of, I guess, like lack of feeling in it. You go to step on your foot, and all of a sudden you feel like you're going to fall on your face, and then instead of falling on your face, you quickly think, well, I have to try to like think about what I'm doing just to make a step, and then you try to do that, and it just gets worse.
Right.
It's not like a numb feeling, but it's a very, like, as far as like not being aware of knowing where the notes are, like trying to grab it and you can't grasp it. Your lips don't feel it, and even though you in your mind you know where it is, you're like, I know how to play an F, I know how to play B flat, but my body is not giving me that sensory feedback or the feedback to let me know that it's doing what it needs to do. So it's very difficult. I want to ask you a question about your task specificity symptoms, but before I do that, I want to go ahead and address some of the comments. So we have Christian Morbido, who says hello from Argentina, and he's a student of Mr. Ashby. We have Richard Watson, who says, hi, Warren.
Hi.
And Christian says, I think New York Phil with you, Mr. Warren, and Mr. Harwood was one of the best ever in the whole world.
Well, so that's a very kind statement. I'm glad I made you smile.
Oh.
You just made me smile. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to try and address these questions as much as I can sometimes, because I get a little carried away. I forget about them. And at the end, I'm like typing a ton, and I feel so bad. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. Anyways, also, you guys, for you guys that are watching, even though Warren lives in Denver, it's interesting because I lived in Denver the past 8 years. I was just telling him that. And I actually worked at the University of Denver in the Newman Performing Arts Center as an arts administrator, but more on the lines of their music education programs. So we didn't really cross paths. So I was like, oh, I'm surprised I didn't run into you. But I wanted to ask you some questions about your task specificity. So you said that you're kind of having issues with your quiet playing. Did it ever start doing very specific things like you could slur but you couldn't tongue? You could play in a certain register but not in another register. You could do like fast playing but not slow playing or something like that?
Like I said, the first issue was soft response. The next issue was articulation, and the funny thing is I don't know. Yeah, here we go. Every brass player knows this stuff. So to this day, I can sit there and go, and I haven't played a tuba in 18 years. So to this day, I can sit there and put a ring on my face and set up for a C. And I know that's a C to this day. My issue is as soon as the airstream hits those lips, my upper lip, tries to grab at that air or clamps down. That's, and so, your tuning is out the window. It's gone, The funny thing is that while I was playing, is after a while, the air hitting it, then I could move the upper lip into the place where it needed to be for that note. So if the note was long enough, it would come out with a horrible articulation. And then I could get, quite a decent sound, and I could hold it. Now, if I tried to move that pitch up or down, then there was another, if I wanted to move it down a fourth or something like, it would go through this contortion on the move, and then eventually let me have the note that I was seeking. And this happened mostly in the middle register, the money register for me. So my low register never went out. To this day, I can pick up a horn and play in the low register, and it's fine. I can also still play 5 octaves. It's not graceful going through it, but I can do that. Like I said, it's all at this point, it's all kind of loud, because if I go to play soft, it just doesn't work. So that's my specific kind of issue.
You were telling me beforehand about how your upper lip is cramps a lot, and you were saying that when you went to the neurologist, he was telling you that the lip lock, it happens a lot in primarily low brass players.
Exactly.
And for high brass players, we tend to have like I was telling you, I kind of have this one side of my face where I droop a lot and my corner kind of sags on the side. Right. You were saying that the neurologist said that was more of a high brass kind of thing. So it's interesting seeing between the different types of instruments, like these differences. And I have troubles with lower lip control, where you have troubles with upper lip control, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then did you before as you started experiencing these symptoms, did you know of focal dystonia beforehand then?
No, I batted against this for 8 years in the orchestra before, and it was, I only want to say in the last like 8-9 months of that I had heard of this dystonia thing, and I began to think of it. And, another interesting story that the neurologist I went to was Stephen Frucht in New York. And another interesting thing, I started hanging out with Toby Hanks, who I don't know if a lot of people know, but he was just a fabulous player, and a freelancer in New York, played in the New York City Ballet and played in the New York Brass Quintet for many years, and just a beautiful, beautiful player. And he had it too, and so we started hanging out and sharing ideas. What are you trying? What are you experiencing? what do you do when this happens? You know, a little bit here and there. And he was the guy who told me about Dr. Frucht. And, you know, he went and was diagnosed with dystonia. And he told me that Frucht had told him this story, an analogy of a mailman trying to deliver a letter to a box, and there's a dog in the way. So, you know, the dog is blocking him from dropping this letter in the mailbox. So the mailman finds a circuitous route. He finds a way to get to the mailbox that the dog isn't looking for, and for a short time, he's able to deliver the mail through this kind of odd route. But in about 2 weeks, the dog finds that route and blocks that. And then, you know, you find another one. And when he told me that story, I mean, that summed up my 8 years like nobody's business. You know, I kept thinking, okay, I think I'm onto something here. You know, I've got a way to get this to happen. And then 2 weeks later, it would not work. And, you know, and anytime I went back to what I had trained myself to do and what worked pretty well for all those years, you know, that never worked. You know, so it was always an alternative route. And within 2-3 weeks, that alternative route didn't work either. You know, and I would try and find another one. So, you know, I did this for 8 years. You know, call me stubborn. You know, and I really did want to find a way out of this. You know, I wanted to play well again, and it, you know, it just wasn't to be. So in the last year, you know, Toby told me about that, and finally I got to the point where I thought, I'm going to go see this guy. You know. So I took one of these in there, and, you know, and showed him, and, you know, I buzzed, and my upper lip would quiver, you know, and he said, what's this quiver about? And I said, I know where I want my upper lip to be. I know where I want it to go for this note. And the quiver is the upper lip wanting to do something else. And you know, the quiver is the fight between my will and what it wants to do. And he says, well, what if you just let it do what it wants to do? So I showed him that. I blew a stream of air. The upper lip curled under. There was no buzz. And he said, that's it. You know, you have dystonia. And it was that quick. The diagnosis was that quick. What I give him huge credit for was when I walked into his office, he asked me, the first thing he asked me was, where are you emotionally with this? You know, talk to me about what you think about this. And at that point, I was of the mind where I told him, I want to get back to 100% or I'm going to stop. And I had purchased an own occupation disability policy, you know, a few years before this happened. I used to make and build and you know, design tubas, and I had a shop in my basement, and I always thought, you know, what if I cut off a finger doing that or something like that, you know? So when this disability policy knocked on my door, literally a woman knocked on my door, you know, or she called and said, you know, we should talk about this. You know, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, you know, I should protect myself because, you know, I might, you know, do something working on a tuba that might disable me. So little did I know that it would end up, you know, being this, but it was. So it afforded me the opportunity to be able to go into Frucht, the doctor, and say, I want to play 100% or I'm going to stop, because I could afford to do it. You know, I knew that policy was there, and financially it wouldn't kill me to stop. And he said, well, that's really good to know. He said, because you know, some people don't have that, and they need to navigate their way through. However, you know, and he wanted to know all of that before he even examined me, and I just thought that was, you know, not only it's psychologically wise, and you know, and it's really caring for a patient before he even does any kind of medical examination. And so once I told him that, we started looking, and like I said, it didn't take him long to figure out, you know, I had dystonia. And then, you know, when they made the pronouncement, then I could apply for disability insurance. So.
Oh yeah, I had read about that you had taken out disability insurance, which is really smart, because I think a lot of musicians don't think about that, you know, ahead of time. just in
The
case.
policies can be hard to come by sometimes. And for anybody else out there thinking about that, know that there are two kinds of disability policies. There's any occupation, and then there's own occupation. So the any occupation, the policy only pays if you can not work in any occupation at all. So that policy is obviously a lot cheaper, and but it means you cannot work in any occupation whatsoever. So the likelihood of them having to pay that out is much smaller. The own occupation costs a lot more, and that one is if you can't work in the occupation you are currently making your living in, then they pay. And because my teaching was less than 11% of what I made during that time, it meant that teaching was shielded from that. It meant that I could teach all I wanted going forward, and the policy would still pay because I made more than 89% of my living playing the tuba. So for any professional player out there that's thinking of looking into a disability policy, make sure it's an own occupation policy that you're checking out.
Well, that's really good advice. Thank you for sharing that as well, because I know some people have been asking about it beforehand, and I forgot to write it down. So thank you for covering that. I do have a couple questions on here. I have Frank Ortega. Hi, Frank. Thank you
Hi,
for joining.
Frank.
And he wants to ask, do you use any specific methods to help combat the dystonia, or did you try any methods while you were trying to regain your playing abilities?
I tried everything under the sun. I tried every thought process I could think of. I did this for 8 years. So, you can imagine how many thought permutations I went, through to try and do this. And I think the answer that I would give is that if you are dealing with this and you have to deal with this through your profession, be prepared to be the mailman who's finding a different route to deliver the letter every 2 weeks. Just be prepared to go through that, because I just don't think there's any escaping that.
Yeah, it's definitely it's difficult to rehabilitate. For some people, it's just difficult because everybody has kind of different levels of severity, different things that it affects. Some people are able to retrain, 2 years, and others like me, it takes 10 years to get back to the point of being able to play again, like in just and I only play in an amateur level of group. Like I love the orchestra, and I don't think I could ever get back to that level of advanced playing. I hope I can, but after 10 years, like you, after 12 years, it's like, this is exhausting. Like I love it, but it's exhausting, and it's a hard, long road. I won't ever give up, but at the same time, it's one of those things where you have to kind of be on the fence, like, how do I pace myself? What's realistic? What can I do after I've tried almost everything?
Right. Yeah. I think you're just, and I get a lot of emails and calls from people that say, I think I have dystonia, or I've been diagnosed with dystonia, or, the one thing I tell everybody is that there is no one proper way to deal with this. It's going to be different for everybody. And so don't try and model your dealing with this on somebody else's, what they do. How you feel about it emotionally might be different. Your needs financially might be different. I ran across one guy who's a professional horn player locally here who still plays in amateur groups like you. And this guy was a professional horn player, and he said, I just can't quit. So I play in local groups, and I accept the compromise. Who is far by it from me to judge that. I'm nor should anybody else. If the group is happy to have him and he's he's enjoying playing that, great. So there's no one specific way to deal with this. And I tell people, your process is going to be uniquely your process, and let it be, and allow the process to change and morph over a period of time. You may feel about it differently in 2 years than you do now. Fine. However it shakes out for you. And again, as you say, I think there are different levels of severity of this. And it affects people in different ways. It might affect somebody at an extreme of playing that they don't have to do very often. So, they're able to shield that or sequester that out from the bulk of what they do, and can be quite functional. Mine was right smack in the middle of register, for starting notes. And, there was just, for me, there was no way around that. And boy, I know that I tried. The one thing that banging on this for 8 years and then getting a diagnosis, I know deep down that I didn't leave any cards on the table. I tried everything I could think of. And after that process, it was 8 years of not very much fun. And the diagnosis really was a relief for me. It told me, one, I wasn't too lazy. Two, I wasn't too stupid. Three, there's a medical reason for this, and I probably wasn't going to get my way out of it. And at the end of all that, it was just an excuse. It was permission for me to stop banging my head against the wall. The wall was not going to give. All I was going to do was bang my head and make my life, miserable further. And gave me permission to stop. And like I said, that's my experience. I am not here to say that that's correct for anybody else.
Thank you for saying that. With the diagnosis, I mean, it helps a lot too. Yeah, it is a relief, because I think, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but for me, being I was never a professional player or well known or anything, so I had to deal with a lot of people, even professional horn players telling me, you need to correct your technique, you need to fix your embouchure, you need to do this, you need to do that. And kind of, just trying to convince me that it's all in my head, or it's something that is fixable with just very, basic stuff.
Right.
Like I was telling you in the email, like I get a lot of suggestions for Jacob's method and for Roger Rocco and that kind of stuff. And I've tried all that, and it doesn't work for me. And
I went to see Jacobs, when, I mean, I had lessons with him, a few lessons with him in college, and we knew each other because, when Chicago came to New York, we would always go have dinner, So when this came on, I flew to Chicago, and I went to see him, and he really didn't have anything for me. I don't think it was out there as a possible diagnosis at that point in time, and I don't think he knew that was a thing, So he worked at it from an air standpoint, and so here's the thing that somebody without dystonia cannot possibly understand. And before I had dystonia, I could not have possibly understood it either. And that is when your embouchure is wrong, you cannot make yourself move air, especially if you have many years of conditioning to where it's right and just freely move air. And then all of a sudden, there's a kink in the chain of events, and you're aware of it, no, it's not ready to go yet. You withhold your air. You just will, and I think a person who's never had dystonia just can't understand the degree to which that's true.
Yeah, because I people always will tell me all the time, like, you just need to sing, or you just need to sing more. But the thing is, like, I'm like, I don't think you understand, like, when people can't get a sound out of their instrument, you can't even, I mean, we aren't even focused on music. We're not even focused on, we're right now is being brought back to, there's something wrong with the signals that are being sent
Right.
to my
Exactly.
face. There's sensory disorder, there's perception problems, there's tactile stimulation problems.
I
It's
think
just,
you know,
yeah.
some of the latest thinking is that they think there's a remapping of the brain somewhere. And you know, one of the things that hit me is, you know, when I stopped playing, I moved to Denver and I didn't do anything for 2 years. I mean, you know, the rug was pulled out of my life, and you know, and I didn't know what life was going to be like. You know, so I went to a community college that was 3 miles from my house and just took classes just for, you know, just for grins, you know, just for some sort of intellectual stimulation. And I took a psychology class. And I remember the guy who was a fabulous teacher. It's just really good. I stole money from those people because, you know, I paid next to nothing for those classes, and they were fantastic. I just feel like I stole from those folks. At any rate, he was talking about the first time that they knew that a human brain was plastic. You know, the thought was always, you know, you're born with what you're born with, you know, and you develop synapses, and then they die off. And you know, that was a prevalent thought, I think, before this. But what happened was there was a fellow apparently who had lost a hand or an arm or something, and he was shaving one day, and as the razor came across this part of his face, he felt this on his phantom arm, this phantom thing on his arm that was no longer there. And you know, it turns out the part of the brain that controls your hands and your face are right next to each other back here. So the part of the brain that had sensory input from you know, this part of his body was left dormant, had nothing to do. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to play over in this region, which was right next door, which happened to be the guy's face. So you know, when that came up in class, you know, I thought, wow, you know, that's interesting, because you know, when you hear about musicians with dystonia, where does it show up? It shows up in their face and their hands. You know, so I
Yeah.
found that intriguing. But what the upshot of all that was that was the first time that they began to think that the brain was plastic, that it could change. So now I think some of the latest thinking of dystonia is they think it's a remapping of the brain. So my question that I will probably take to my grave is, why can't I remap it back? You know, it worked fairly well once upon a time, and if it remapped over to here, why can't I remap it back here? And you know, and those are some of the thoughts, not so clearly defined, but I did have those sort of thoughts as I was going through this process of trying a different approach to, you know, to get this back. Why can't I remap this back?
Yeah, it's frustrating because for some people, they can try to, you know, like for me, I feel definitely like I have found a way around it in a different signal. That's taken a long time to build, because I think what people don't realize is when you're a musician and you develop this refined skill over years and years of playing, and that's damaged, you try to rebuild it in a different direction. The
Right.
other signal is going to try to interfere every single time. It's always going to say, wait, I know what you're doing. And it tries to, you know, get you back on that old path. So it's very scary. And then for some people, they'll recover a certain amount of abilities, but then they'll end up getting it in another area, like another area of their face, or that it transfers over to their speaking. Or for hand dystonia, some people retrain on their other hand, and then it
And then they
ends
get
up.
it there.
So it's really weird, because I feel like some of us are more, you know, maybe more prone to it developing further. Your cat. Oh my goodness, I have two cats here, and I'm surprised that they aren't meowing during the live stream, because every live stream I've done, they have meowed like so loudly throughout it. But yeah, the remapping is a very interesting question. I think if we can find a way, that'd be awesome. But like you said, I don't know how applicable it is to everyone, because everyone is just affected to various degrees. Adam Stevens is a tuba player that I interviewed. I think he's one of the first people that I interviewed for this series that I'm doing. And he's a tuba player, and he retrained with Janice Kagaris. And he's able to play again. He's just now starting to do auditions again and everything. And he was talking a lot about how she's kind of helped him get back on this track of remapping things. But it's like you say, it's very interesting because I think one neurologist put it really well. The dystonia. So when somebody has a phantom limb, they feel an extra limb there that it isn't there. They feel so like, you know, like imagine you don't have your finger, but you still feel it there even though it's not there. Where dystonia is the opposite. It's like you have this limb, but you don't feel it there. It's missing. It's just not not there. It feels foreign. It's gone. Yeah. Let me go ahead and check my questions really quick. I just want to make sure that I'm staying on top of this, just because I always, like I said, I always get distracted. All right, Tiago says, hello, Katie and Professor Warren. I'm a professional bass trombone from Portugal. Oh yeah, he's the one talking about. And he says that he's drawing a new path to move on in a new area than performance after he's been diagnosed with focal dystonia. I would like to ask if you feel that there were some psychological or environmental factors that may have influenced or triggered the way that your dystonia developed. So do you have like any, did you feel like it was multiple factors that kind of played in?
You know, I obviously have spent a lot of time, you know, is there some situation I'm in either physically or, you know, emotionally that's causing this? And boy, for the life of me, I haven't been able to put my finger, you know, and I've tried to have an honest look, because listen, you know, if I'm fighting this 8 years trying to save a career, you know, I'm serious about it. So I would look at anything, and did look at anything and anywhere. And you know, I never came up with a really good answer to that. You know, I don't know. You know, the only thing I could possibly think of is I played an instrument for a while that was just a beast to play. And the horrible acoustic situation I found myself in just sort of required that instrument. If you know, it just and you know, and I used to bend pitches a lot. I mean, you know, the slots of the notes were not in always optimum places. You know, and I got really good at bending pitches. You know, that's the only possible thing that I can think of that, you know, that may have trained me into, you know, doing, you know, bend a note down, or, you know, or something like that. You know, that's the only possible thing I could possibly come up with.
Yeah, it's hard to define. Like a lot of people will ask me, and I'm sure any musicians out there that are watching that have dystonia feel the same way. Like we get asked all the time, like, what do you think caused it? But you can't really pinpoint it, because it just seems like one of those things where you've just been going along and playing, and you keep getting better and better, and and a lot of us tend to be in leadership positions, whether we're at amateur level or professional level. I think Dr. Fuchs said in an article that a large percentage of the musicians that get it are professional level, but we tend to be high achieving. So it's like we're going along and we're improving and we're doing really well. And, you know, we obviously don't have problems with, you know, stage performance type things like anxiety. And if we do, we know well far ahead, you know, a time to how to cope with it. But it's just one of those things where you could look back and you could say, well, yeah, I was going through a hard time, but then there's other times in my life where I've gone through worse things, like psychologically or emotionally, or, you know, I happen to be practicing a lot, but it's like, yeah, but I also, you know, when I was preparing for this performance, I was also practicing a lot too. I don't know what caused it. I honestly don't. When I look back, it's difficult. It could be like, well, I went through embouchure change. You know, was playing a concert or something. And then for some people, they're very specific. They're like, oh yeah, I started studying with a new teacher and they changed something about my mechanics. Like they changed the way I use my fingers. And then I found myself with dystonia like 4 months later or something, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Also,
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I have so many questions and I feel like there's never enough time, and I'm really enjoying this. I have to say, I really love talking to tuba players. You guys are the chillest, coolest people. So.
Those low frequencies.
I know, right? Let's see here. Oh yeah, did you think about and this is a common question. Did you try any medical treatments such as oral medication or Botox? I know at the time, you know, Botox for brass musicians it has been known to not really help that much, just because they can't really figure out like what exactly area they need to put it in.
Exactly. And how much?
Yeah, and how much? I know that Dr. Fuchs showed a video recently. He did a talk at a flute event, and he's showing videos where they're doing this kind of like where they do like an ultrasound on the hand, and they're able to find which dystonic muscle to inject the Botox in, and them experimenting with like how much, and it's been a lot more effective, where they're trying to develop more effective Botox treatment that helps. But for embouchure dystonia, we're kind of like, you know, for us it's unfortunate because our playing is so complex. The muscles we use, the tonguing, the breathing, and all that stuff combined. We just have so much little research on it, you know, as far as treatment methods.
And you know, I mean, we need to be able to tense those muscles tremendously and then turn around and relax them, you know, at the drop of a hat. You know, so you know, we need this full range of tension. And so, you know, the early folks that I knew who went to Dr. Frucht, I know a couple of folks that tried Botox things. Yeah, it was great. You know, I could play in the low register, couldn't play out of the staff. You know, couldn't you know, couldn't play into the upper staff at all. So okay, you're taking one thing and then you're giving this other thing. It's still not a complete picture. You know?
Do you ever have a weird? This is a weird question, and I was thinking about. I just interviewed Marty a couple weeks ago, Marty Hackelman, and he's saying that. And you know, he has dreams, and I have this too, where I have dreams where I can play the horn just normally, and then I wake up and it's like, what the heck?
I do too. So now I play tuba in my dreams, and I sound great.
Yeah.
And that's the only place that happens.
Yeah, I was like able to play normally on stage, and I'm like, wow, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it.
It's all fine. You know, it's like it was. It's all good. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, I mean, like I said, I haven't played tuba in 18 years and 19 years at this point. And I think I had one within the past week. I don't have them very frequently anymore, but they still show up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too as well. Not very often. But did you? Oh yeah, I was gonna say, do you still play a little bit? Because I know you teach lessons and everything.
I do, but I mean, I play less and less and less. You know, there's an interesting process that I went through with teaching with this too. You know, when I was first diagnosed, I taught at Juilliard for one more year after my diagnosis, and it was emotional hell for me. And the reason is because I was going in there and I was asking these students to do stuff that I could no longer do. And I told myself, you have no right to be doing this. You know, how dare you ask somebody to do something that you can't do? You know, and so I just felt like a complete fraud. I just thought, I can't do this. I can't do this. That summer I taught at Aspen too for 4 weeks. And again, it was just hell. It was fraudulent. And over the winter, Aspen called and they said, you know, we want you to do the whole session from now on. And I don't know why I didn't close the door, but I didn't. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. The thought I had in the meantime, and maybe this is the BS I tell myself to be able to go ahead and do this, but it's this: a tennis player has a coach, a pitcher has a coach, a batter has a coach, a quarterback has a coach, a lineman has a coach, you know, a basketball player has a coach. You know, all these world-class athletes have coaches out there, and you know, they don't do it, but they can still help somebody else do it at a higher level. And I thought, well, why don't I go to Aspen next summer with that in mind? You know, I mean, I know how it feels. I know how it's supposed to sound. You know, I know what I taught myself to try and do it. You know, I still have musical thoughts. And I mean, you were talking about somebody with Jerome Ashby a while ago. And, you know, one of the things, I stayed in New York for a year after my diagnosis, and Ashby was one of my 2 best friends in the orchestra. And so we hung out, and we lived a half a mile from each other. So we hung out a lot during that year. And I remember we were out to dinner one time, and he says, "You still think of yourself as a musician, don't you?" I said, "No, I don't play anything. I don't play anything. So no, I don't consider myself a musician." And he said, "That's wrong. That's just not right." And I didn't see it that way at the time. I later came to see it his way, actually. So I mean, I still think musically. In fact, I wish I could play so I could deliver some of the musical content that's in my brain at this point, that just simply wasn't there 18 years ago. And I think that's true of any musician. I don't think you ever stop growing in your musical sensibilities. And, so that's just a lifelong process. The only problem with me is I don't get to try and manifest that on an instrument. So I try less and less, and I go back to, I've tried to make as many analogies for teaching as I can. I will draw, I will move, I will sing badly. I will verbalize something. I'll look for a way to impart an idea. And what I know is everybody has different learning styles, each student. And, once you find the way in, you have a better idea of how to impart the information. And the other thing that I thought was, when I studied with my teacher, he had just retired from the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he was no longer playing. So he gave me parameters, musical parameters, and he gave them to me verbally. And then, using those as boundaries, I had to sort of create my own way to go, within the boundaries that he was trying to keep me in. So I didn't grow up imitating somebody, as a musician. I grew up looking for a voice, but then I had to stay in a pen that was defined, like good time and good pitch, and a decent sound, and good phrasing, and listen to others, and balance and hook sounds up that way. So but within that, there's a lot of leeway. It wasn't like, do it just like this and imitate that. I wasn't taught that way. So that gave me a little piece going forward too, that I could still teach folks without saying, do it just like this.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really good. And I'm sure that, having this experience has made you a better teacher as well, just as far as, understanding, other musicians, other brass players that have setbacks,
Well, you should ask my students about that. They might tell you otherwise, but.
Yeah. And it's good that you had such supportive colleagues also while you're going through that, because I know for a lot of us, we don't, or we have people that are just completely like,
yeah, it can be rough out there.
Yeah, they're like,
I had an author.
What?
Yeah, I had an author contact me recently about my experience, because he was going to write a novel about a musician with dystonia.
Oh, please tell me that they have
and he was out there collecting people's experiences. And the last communication I had with him was, really, you had supportive colleagues, because I've heard other people have not had that experience. And he was sort of wondering about what to do with the character when the character goes back to play in the orchestra. And I understand this quandary completely, because I've heard of other situations where the support level has not been what I received, which again makes me even more grateful to the people that I worked with.
Oh, that's awesome. And I know you have so much support from people who love your recordings that you've done, and so many people were excited about you with doing this live stream today. I mean, they just, I feel like they're like, we miss him, we need him, we want to see him.
And now you don't.
And I have to ask you a random question, since you're from Denver. Again, we have that kind of commonality. Have you been down East Colfax recently?
Not in a little while, but I mean, it's gentrifying just like all of Denver.
Oh, oh
You
my God.
know, I mean, it just is.
I
One of my
said as a comical question because I know, you know, there's so many jokes about East Colfax. So
No, it's not, you know, I don't live near there. I live in the southwest part of Denver. So it's, you know, it's a bit of a schlep for me to get over there.
do you where can I ask where you live in Southwest Denver?
Um, do you know where Hamden and Sheridan are?
Yeah. Hmm.
You know, there's a place called Pinehurst, and it's right on a golf course. We're in there.
Wow. I lived in Ken Carroll before I moved. Or,
Okay. Okay.
not in the valley. I was on the other side, the not as rich part of Ken Carroll.
Okay.
I also want to ask before we leave, I just want to check on some of the questions and see if we have any more before we go here. And just thank you for taking the time also with everything that you've discussed. Let's see here. Oh, Frank, he wants to tell you that he says, thank you, Warren. You have been a tremendous inspiration throughout my entire career. And thank you for these interviews. This is a very important conversation to continue to have. And Tiago says, Professor Warren Deck will always be a musician and one of the biggest influences for brass players all over the world. How this new circumstances in your life allowed you to find who you are, or how did these new circumstances in your life allow you to find who you are without the instrument? That's a good question.
I mean, to stop this is to go through an identity crisis. No two ways about it. You know, I mean, a lot of your identity is wrapped up in what you do. And, you know, I mean, I'd heard for years and years and years that, you know, playing an instrument and music is something we do. It's not who we are, but it's something we do. And I get that, but I would venture to say that there are a lot of musicians out there who say, no, a musician is who I am, you know, first and foremost. Otherwise, you know, why would you put yourself through all the stuff that we put ourselves through to learn to play these instruments well, to learn music? You have to love it just beyond, you know, anything. Just and really the passion of it is a gift. The one thing I did realize was I was 48 when I left the orchestra, and for my whole life I always knew what I wanted to do. From 7th grade, I told you about that guy, you know, that I ran into in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. From 7th grade on, I knew what I wanted to do, and so and at age 48, you know, the rug's pulled out. I got nothing, and I thought, okay, now I know what an 18-year-old who's graduated from high school, they're going to college, and they don't know what they want to major in. They don't know what I for the first time in my life, I completely understood what those folks were going through. And like I talked about with Jerome Ashby earlier, you know, I still didn't conceive of myself as a musician at that point. You know, I was just like, okay, what do I have? You know, what skills do I have? You know, fortunately for me, music tugged me back in. Aspen came up, and Kathy Brannigan, a lady in Denver who's been here since I think 1973, started a group called the Denver Brass, and she taught tuba at DU. And I've known Kathy since I was in 7th grade because she went to Michigan. And so she calls when I get to town. And you know, Kathy's somebody, my parents lived in Denver. So whenever my wife and I came to Denver to visit my parents, we would always go visit Kathy too. You know, so, you know, it had been a friendship, you know, where we see each other infrequently for a long time. And so when I first got to town, the phone rang and Kathy said, I know you're in town. You're not going to hear from me for a year, but I'm going to call you in a year. So, okay. A year later, the phone rang. It was Kathy. She said, we need to talk. So she said, I want you to come and teach at DU with me. And I thought, who does this? You know, who says, you know, why don't you come here, share my studio? Who does that? You know, well, only an extraordinary person does that. And she is that. Just no two ways about it. And in 1982, she and her husband founded the Denver Brass. And they're still going on. We're on hiatus, but it's still going on all these years. They're about to have their 40th year, and she created out of nothing an ensemble, a brass ensemble, and they have a library of 2,500 pieces. They've either commissioned or had arranged, or and so after a couple of years that they've got me conducting this group. So I do get to play in a musical sandbox. From time to time. But honestly, Kathy's the person who's given me a musical life in Denver, and so music sucked me back in. So I came to see that Jerome Ashby was correct at the end of the day. And yeah, it is. We are musicians. We're also people, and it's not the only thing we do. I do have one story that's interesting. Is when I first got in the New York Philharmonic. Every May, they would have this reception for retirees, and they'd throw them a party before a concert in May, and then they'd give them boutonnieres at the concert, and have them stand up and acknowledge this is your legacy, and they'd throw them a party afterward. And it was really interesting. My first 4 years there, I didn't know anybody who came back because I'd never worked with any of these people. So they were just all like new faces to me. And then after about 4 years, I started to see people come back for this retirees thing, people I knew and had worked with. And it was really interesting to see some of them came back and they looked 10 years younger than the last time I saw them. Others came back and they looked like death warmed over. And the pattern I was able to put together was the folks that had interests other than just playing their instrument, they came back looking fantastic. And the person who had only the interest of their music, they came back looking not very good, and they were usually gone shortly after that. So I always took that to heart. Is yeah, enjoy music a lot, but do other stuff too. And dig in and enjoy that. So that we're more than just a musician.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you for saying that. I totally agree. I mean, it's hard, when your whole life has been music, and then you have to rethink about not just who you are as a musician, but as a person, what other things you have, what other things you can focus on. I think Adam, when I was interviewing him, he was saying that he kind of had when he took the step away from the tuba, he just recently started to get more involved in doing like maybe he can correct me. I think it's Taekwondo, or what is the Brazilian one you do? I can't ever say it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So he started doing that. He said he loves it because it brings him back that sense of community and
community, discipline, individual achievement, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So anything like that helps us refocus on kind of the same kind of goals, but in a different aspect, and while also still having fun. Before we go, I just want to ask one last question. Do you have any advice for anyone? And I know this is very broad to ask. Any advice, like let's say you did have a tuba player that came to you and said, "Hey, I was just diagnosed with this." Like you said, it happens commonly. What would be your advice as far as the first couple of steps they should take?
After diagnosis?
Yeah, after diagnosis.
Just take a step back and breathe. Don't understand that it's a process. It's going to unfold. You don't know how it's going to unfold. And you're just going to put those blinders on, and you're going to take one baby step in front of another, and just keep moving somewhere. It may not be the ultimate place you end up, but just keep moving, and don't get swallowed by it. Don't get paralyzed in your life by that. Yeah, okay, you just run into a brick wall, but there's still 180 degrees you can travel in. From that position. So yeah, you're going to make a pivot, and you know, maybe you're one of the lucky ones, and the new path that you take is exactly where you're going to be along. But you know, I wouldn't expect that it would be. I would expect it to be somewhat circuitous in terms of, you know, where, oh, okay, let's go on this road for a while. The thing I would say is this: I don't think I need to play another Tchaikovsky fifth. You know, it's a great symphony. You know, I love it. It's a great symphony. I played it a lot. You know, so you know, I had that experience in my life. I'm incredibly grateful. I wouldn't trade it for anything. By the same token, I've got this life in Denver where, you know, I now work with a brass ensemble. I teach kids, and you know, and I've come to know a whole new group of people that are really, really cool, that I would not have had this experience without it. So I'm okay. But I'll tell you, it took a while to get there. So be patient, be kind to yourself, be supportive of yourself, and don't get stagnant. That's what I'd say.
Well, thank you. Really good advice, and very inspiring hearing it from you, as you're a very big figure to many of us out there. So thank you for saying that. I do know that you have a thing coming up later today, so I don't want to keep you any longer. But I do want to say that, you know, just want to acknowledge your career and your journey as a musician and everything you've gone through. I know that you get a lot of credit already, so I know that's not much coming from me. But I do want to say that it means a lot just being able to discuss this with a professional level musician who has gone through this, because I feel like for a lot of us that are amateurs that have gone through this, you know, it makes us feel not so alone, knowing that, you know, it's not just because we're, you know, not professional level musicians, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, and those are really kind thoughts you say, Katie. You know, I mean, I sit there and I go to work, and you know, it's normal for me to hear like world-class players every day. You know, I mean, I heard Phil Smith every day. I heard Joe Alessi every day. I heard Phil Myers every day. You know, Don Harwood every day. Dave Finlayson every day. You know, and it became normal. I now realize it wasn't. You know, it was extremely special, and I'm incredibly fortunate. And you know, just so you go to work, and you know, and you feel like, okay, you know, these are really, you know, special people, and I need to keep up with them. You know, I hope I'm giving them as good as I get. And so it's just, you just go to work, you know, and you don't realize that, oh well, you know, somebody really enjoyed that somewhere along the line. You know, it's not something you think about on a daily basis. You just think about trying to get better. And you know, and it's moments like these when you say kind things like that, you realize, okay, the work was really worth it. And you know, and so I have really a lot of gratitude to you for saying that in a moment like this. You know, at this point, I wish it were better, but I'm really glad it was good for somebody. So I'm grateful to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I mean, I'm just really glad that also you have a life in Denver that you built and that really makes you happy as far as teaching and being at DU, and it's a great school. And you know, I might come back there, maybe. We'll see.
It's a nice town. It's a nice town, but don't tell anybody. We don't need any more traffic.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Yeah, I think that's one of the main reasons I moved, was the traffic, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah.
I grew up in a small town. Like, I mean, I grew up in North Dakota on a farm in the middle of nowhere. So, you know, being a big city girl, I'm not very good at it. Well, thank you, Warren Deck, for the interview today. It means so much. After this, I'm going to go ahead and it will remain on my Facebook timeline, but I'll upload it to YouTube and send you links so you have access to it as well. And
Okay.
thank you for all those other people out there that have been sending in questions and asking and saying hello and everything. If any of you have any questions afterwards that you think of, I'll go ahead and forward them to Warren if you forgot anything. And I'm sure that we'd love to answer them for you as well. So thank you, Warren, so much. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Good, what do I say? Like whatever you're doing later. Sorry.
Okay, actually, it got canceled because we were going to try and live stream a concert with the Denver Brass, but
Oh.
we got nixed. So.
Oh, by the way, that group is awesome. Like you guys get to play in the coolest places too. Cause like, I think one time I attended a performance and it was like in this like castle or like this little castle.
Yeah, south of town. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Warren. Well, have a good day. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care, Katie. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.